Hi everybody and welcome back to another episode of B2B NAV. This week we thought we'd spend just a quick one, 10-15 minutes discussing the art of effectively planning communications campaigns going into the new year. So typically Q4 of any calendar year involves a lot of our clients starting to think about not only looking at what they've achieved in the year that's just passing or coming to pass, and also what the key priorities are going into the following year. And obviously this is a time when awful lot of plans are pulled together, and we can touch on what they actually mean in reality, but an awful lot of good intention and what people want to achieve. I guess your experience with that, Ollie, I guess from a digital tech standpoint, but also a wider communications point, do you see a lot of the digital campaigns being reflected on and evaluated at this time of the year, or is it not the case?
I guess it depends, as it always does to some extent from client to client. But yeah, it's typically a time of year when we end up pulling together a lot of reports and seeing how things have gone overall. Because when you're in the thick of it, you tend to be looking at it on a more monthly basis. Mm-hmm. So it's a great time to take a bit of a step back and think about this as a whole. You'll always have ebbs and flows within a campaign. So overall, how did this work? Did we achieve what we were trying to set out to achieve or not? Whether every client actually chooses to go through that process or not, they should.
No, but I guess that's one of the points to kind of touch on, and no doubt we'll kind of talk in jest about it today a little bit. But in the sense of, do you think people actually do go through that process of, most importantly, as you said, reflecting on what you actually set out to do? I think you can talk about the performance of, and not necessarily a digital campaign, but your wider communication strategy. But you can certainly speak about how it's performing at the minute and how it's done and what the impact of it's been. But do you think the actual plans that are set at the start of the year is a disciplined process that many people revisit?
I think it starts a bit earlier than that. Did you actually set out a detailed plan at the start of the year or not?
Yeah.
Because I think in a lot of cases you haven't. You started out with a budget and then you've had some ideas in mind and then you've run that for a year.
Yeah.
But if you don't have figures, KPIs, things like that attached to it or goals in mind, then you've got nothing to compare to when it comes to that end of year period to reflect against. So as I say, some clients are very for that, others are obviously not quite so into the numbers.
It's just never been lost on me, and it stuck with me probably from the professional services days of when clients would spend hours, weeks crafting these beautiful plans for the next year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years sometimes, that they'd update every single year. To be bound up into beautiful glossy folders and presentation documents, and they'd all sit down at a board meeting and you'd sign it off and everybody would be happy with that strategy, and then they were just never referred to again. They never even saw the light of day other than being carted around under somebody's arm, but never really referred to. And I think now in the marketing world you see that kind of similar kind of pretense sometimes around, I'm thinking more around KPIs as well, that KPIs are mentioned at the start of a campaign, but how often, I'd be interested to get your opinion on how often are they revisited, or are they kind of lost in the ether of the transactional activity in a way?
I think when a client starts off with meaningful KPIs, they're often monitored and looked at. Mm-hmm. If they're more, let's say, I don't know the correct word, but kind of cosmetic KPIs.
Loose?
If it's things like, let's take a digital campaign, for example, because of my background. If it's more a campaign where we're focusing on impressions and clicks, they're quite weak in terms of metrics to determine whether your campaign's really having an impact or not. If we're talking about trying to actually drive leads, and let's take that a step further and say instead of marketing leads, we're talking about sales leads, that's more likely to result in some serious comparison happening, and more meaningful understanding about what value your campaigns have actually driven.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then in terms of, I guess, the reasons why maybe people don't dedicate the time they should do to that kind of planning activity and do it as diligently as they should. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure on people's time at the minute. Our own clients and running your own business, there's equal pressure on your time. But surely it's fundamental to the success of your next year's activity, assuming we're operating on a calendar year basis, obviously, to make it, to commit to having that time to actually dedicate to such a diligent process.
Yeah, but I think it's also, it can be hard or be seen as hard, and I think when something's daunting, it's something you stay away from a little bit. And I think there's also that aspect of, I don't think, if we compare marketers to sales people, I don't think marketers in general are as used to having a number assigned to their role and being told this is what you need to achieve, whereas obviously as a salesperson you typically have weekly, monthly targets that you need to hit and that your performance is measured against. And I think we tend to shy away from that in marketing more than we should. I know I'm talking a lot more about sales and lead generation here. I realise not all campaigns that if your awareness, and it does need to be measured differently. But when we are talking about lead gen, then
I think that works. It's an interesting point, because arguably if you were to write down the perfect way to structure a plan for a business, you'd start with the business objectives. So and quite often you don't never see sight of those, do you, from a marketeer's point of view? You join the journey so far down the line when either the business objectives have already been set, or maybe they're just not even spoken about. You might join at kind of the marketing objective side of things, but it's important to wind it back to what does the business want to achieve. So when you're talking about sales and lead generation, arguably a lot of that is typically growth, you would say, from a business objectives point of view. So a lot of business objectives you'll see are they want to grow by X%, or they want to sell X more pounds worth of products or services, or whatever it may be. But in order to achieve that, you've got to go back to that business objective level to therefore break it down, as you say. So what's the sales lead? What's the marketing qualified lead? What's the activity? What's going to generate that kind of drive and scale of growth?
So we see it with things like, let's say, take a product launch campaign, because that's always an easy one to think of, where a company has something shiny and new that they want to get out there in the market. They're presumably either created something new, or they've seen a need for something within the marketplace that they want to make a big fuss about. And I think what we sometimes, not always, but sometimes see is that a company will go out there and start promoting that, and it's just like, let's promote it. We've got £10,000, euros, dollars, whatever it might be, that we want to put behind that. Let's get that out there. But that figures often come up with because that's a budget they have in mind, and they're not considering that business objective that they're trying to achieve with that product. So what is success for them with that new launch? What are they trying to achieve? Do they need X number of sales? Do they have X number of staff that are focused on pushing that from a sales perspective? If so, they might need leads flowing in from marketing to keep them in a job, to keep them occupied. So I think that's where we do need to go back to what is the business actually trying to achieve, and then structure our marketing around that to support that, rather than kind of doing marketing for the sake of it.
I don't know how much exposure you've had to the dialogues, but I think quite often when you push back on clients or contacts to ask them what their business objectives are, do you think they actually know the marketing functions and the marketing teams? Do you think it's been communicated well enough to them of overall? Because one of the things I'm thinking about here is we run our team transparently here, in the sense that we tell them exactly what we're going to do on a granular basis, and part of that for me is telling the team, so you've got a commitment to deliver it. And it's always been a psychological thing for me to say, we want to deliver this next year, here's our goals, here's our metrics, because then it gives you that commitment to do it, because it's almost embarrassing to stand up in front of the team and say you've not done it. But I know some larger businesses, sometimes they'll have their town halls, they'll have their presentations, but it'll be very top line what they share with the team. You know, you want growth of 5%. How they actually deliver that growth and how they get there and the steps towards doing that. Obviously, marketing's a fundamental role in that journey of shaping and delivering that growth. But do you think a lot of the contacts we're working with have the understanding of how their marketing activity is linked to the business objectives or not?
I'd say in some cases it really comes down to, I guess, individuals involved, and not necessarily even the individuals that we're working with that are our contacts, but I guess it comes down to who sits above them from a management point of view. Is that being passed down or not? 'Cause, I think my experience of previous roles is probably similar to what you've mentioned there, which is that you often don't know what the business is trying to achieve or why, and it's just we've got something we need to market.
Well, I think that's important. It ties on for everything, but in terms of when you cascade it down through the organisations, and it's something we have to work on here, and I'm conscious of a lot of the time, is to when people want to understand what value they add or what purpose they serve in a business and how they contribute to the success of the business, understanding those business level objectives, and if it's a marketing team and a sales team, how your role then ties into that and what you're looking to deliver that year. And I wonder whether we've touched on it in previous podcasts, I guess, and chats, whether that's partially because marketing has got away with it lightly in the past, and I can say that with a straight face, but in the sense of they've not been held that accountable in the past to the results, as you say. So in the sense of they've been able to deliver their activity, people know you need to do marketing, but tangibly, if marketing is going to be accountable for 3% of the 10% growth in that year, are they that accountable to it? And I think I keep saying it, I think this is a changing tide you're seeing at the minute.
Well, I think it's one of the ones where certainly, I'm sure I speak for most marketers here, the idea of having a target against your role is it's more worrying, isn't it? You've got a clear line of did you fail or not.
Well, accountability. It's just accountability, though, isn't it? Like, I mean, yeah, some people would say it's fear, some people would say it's worry, some people would say it's stress. It's just accountability. Because otherwise, what are you doing it for?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's just it's something we should just embrace, and it's not necessarily easy. And I'd obviously like to think that anybody will understand that doesn't mean you'll necessarily get it right at the beginning.
Yep.
But if you don't start measuring, you have no clue if what you're doing at the moment is right or not.
No, but I think it'll separate like kind of the men from the boys in the way in the marketing world a little bit, because those that, as you say, you're never going to necessarily get it right first time. There's always a chance to do better. There's always a chance to optimize the results. But those agencies or individuals or whoever who are just used to kind of the spray and pray marketing approach of spend as much as we can and hope something sticks, I just don't think they've got a place going forward as communications is evolving. That marketeers have to take more accountability, but then maybe further up the chain, C-suites need to have more respect for marketing and communications in the sense of the role they play in delivering that growth, and thinking on a more integrated basis.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely a key thing when we start thinking about planning for next year is not necessarily starting with the budget, although no, companies may have fixed budgets, but just think about what you're trying to achieve. Because if you're trying to achieve too much, or you don't know what you're trying to achieve specifically, your plans probably aren't going to work out as well as you'd like.
How many I won't say clients, but in your experience again, do you think there's a bit in the marketing world almost an apathy just to say, well, we'll do what we did last year?
Yeah, to some extent. I think definitely, certainly if it's a company that's not measuring things too closely. And just to be clear, we do try and to educate clients, prospects and companies that we speak to that, you should always be trying to aim for something, but sometimes it's more of a case of that's not what they're used to and that's not the way they want to work. So I think in that case, if they don't have something in mind that they want to achieve, they know they did a £10,000 campaign last time. They've got something coming up again. Nobody complained about it last time. So let's just do that thing again. It seemed to work in terms of the fact that we got lots of impressions and clicks. Great. But again, we didn't necessarily get, if we tied it back to a business objective, you'd probably see it didn't get what you would have liked to get from it.
And how many times realistically, I mean, I'm asking the questions here more just to shape the conversation because I don't know the answer, but how many times do you think sales and marketing actually sit down together as part of the planning process?
I think rarely. In my opinion, I can't be certain because I'm not sitting in with all the clients as they're making these decisions, but I think that's a key thing that should be happening more. And I know obviously it's a widely talked about topic of sales and marketing alignment, but particularly going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of having kind of that review of the last year. I think this is a really great time to try and connect with sales. If we think about any activity that's supposed to drive any kind of lead gen or sales leads, whatever it might be, in B2B that purchase cycle is slow. So while during the month of a campaign, let's say there was a campaign running in February, you might know you generated a lead. You won't know for months if that's going to convert into a sale in many cases. Whereas towards the end of the year, you'll have a much better idea about how successful that's been. How many of those did convert to sales, or at least could be considered a meaningful prospect for the near future. That's always going to be a rolling thing. So there'll be leads that have dropped in the last 2 days that aren't ready yet. But at least you should know from all your activity towards the first half of the year, for example, you should have a good idea about how well that's performed. And if it's a lot of zeros, it's probably not worked too well.
Are you familiar with the term RevOps or revenue ops, revenue operations?
Don't think so.
It's something that I'm hearing more and more mentioned at the minute. So it ties into this point around the alignment of sales and marketing. So it's almost new departments that businesses and corporates are kind of creating now to try and force the alignment of them. So you'll also hear them referred to as, like, I think it's customer success teams and customer success operations, but it's effectively marketers and sales working together to agree on what they're doing at the start of the year, agree on but marketing taking a chunk of that accountability from sales.
It's a ongoing rivalry, isn't it? And I know from I listen to both sales podcasts and marketing podcasts, and you go to events, not at the minute obviously, but generally you go to events
virtual
and you hear a lot of those jokes about, like, oh, sales will ruin our campaign, or you get salespeople joking about how marketers are just going to throw them a load of rubbish. And I find it really frustrating from my point of view because it seems so counterproductive. It's like, just talk to each other.
Yeah, but I think that's the mind shift in us as well as communications experts and agencies and whatever you want to refer to us as, of have we got to embrace that mentality as well? So when we say we work in marketing, do we? And this is something I raise all the time that always gets raised eyebrows with me of, do we actually work in sales? Does everybody work in sales? And you've heard these debates for years and years and years, but I think this movement towards revenue ops or rev ops, you're going to see it more. I don't think it's a fly-by-night kind of change. I think it's more of a considered change by businesses and large corporates to try and force those teams together and get that kind of holistic approach to, I guess, the customer service kind of cycles. But I've not seen it a great deal across our clients yet.
It's interesting. I like the idea of the fact that it's taking the word sales and marketing out of it. So there's no, what I would suspect, reduced tension between who's owning the process. I've heard the marketeers referred to as sales accelerators as part of that process as well, which is, again, it's just interesting too when you think about it. Is helping you sell more or faster is probably part of what marketing does in a way. Well, I heard a great I think it was on a podcast and we probably talked about it on a previous episode, but it was a marketing team in a large international multi-billion-pound company that basically had the marketers assigned to salespeople. They sat in the sales training. They basically just tried to work out how they could support the salespeople better. What troubles were they having during that buying process where they could potentially help out by sending additional touch points to their contacts and things like that. But I think that's a great way to think about it, is just trying to work together and think, how can it help you, as opposed to it being we're over here and you're over there.
I think that's got to come back to the alignment of the targets then and that kind of thing. I really do, because there's nothing more to pull you together than having a clear goal in mind and that clear accountability. It comes back to it all the time for me, I think, in terms of the planning process. But I'd love to canvass our own clients in a way and ask them, how many of you have spoken to sales, how many of you have understood what the business objectives are before you've spun them into marketing objectives for the year, and so on.
I can certainly say from a measurement point of view, it's usually something that we end up kind of suggesting and pushing for. To be like speaking to the marketing contacts and saying, let's hook up with sales and see how they're seeing these leads, for example, going and getting their feedback in there, rather than it being something that's being driven client side. And I'd just relish to see more of that. But a lot of these decisions are things that effectively end up taking place over years, aren't they? As minds slowly shift, as people are slowly educated. But I think we are slowly seeing a move in that direction, at least.
I think you'll see it more as the C-suites and the decision makers and the senior stakeholders in businesses become younger. I think if you were to say to the more mature C-suite individuals, maybe who aren't as forward thinking potentially in their ways, that you should drop sales and marketing and rebrand it revenue operations, they might fall off the chair, whereas other people would just totally get that's the way to align the sales and marketing teams and make them more accountable and so on. So I think it's a changing tide, as you say, but I do think we've got a responsibility as the marketers and the communicators in the mix to want to be held more accountable. And I don't know many marketers that really want to be held accountable.
Well, I think it's just, do you really want to get to the end of a year's worth of activity, and if somebody says, what have you achieved, and not be able to answer that even to yourself, but
that's what drives you, isn't it? Is that not what drives you? If you get to the end of the year, if you ask the question, what have you achieved, and you can sit and look yourself in the mirror and comfortably say not a lot, no, I'm serious. I question. I mean, people have different drives and different abilities, but if you look yourself in the mirror in December and you've looked back on January when you started the year and you don't feel like you've grown or developed or learnt new skills or something, then we're very different people, maybe. You know what I mean? But for me, that's why I love learning new things and love growing and love understanding the new side of things. And for me, with the marketing, the communication side of it, it's changing so rapidly at the minute. For me, it's exciting, and I want us to be held more accountable.
Well, what you want to be able to do, in my opinion, is, again, just sticking with that example of a lead gen campaign, is just be able to say, you spent 5,000 on that, but look what we got from it. I mean, we had that with a client recently where we did a ABM campaign. I think it was one of their first forays into marketing, really, but it went well. They've got a lot of meaningful sales leads and meetings off the back of that campaign with high profile target accounts for them. And I feel like we can be really proud of that and just say we helped make that happen. I mean, a lot of the credits to them for creating a great product. Yeah, absolutely. Helped to facilitate it along the way. And
but again, you've accelerated the sales. Hopefully, that's what you've done, isn't it? You've communicated well and you've accelerated the sales. Obviously, it's their products, as you say, for sure. But then I'm just thinking about other things that you'd think about as part of the planning process, because when we talk about strategy and planning, the strategy work that we do, obviously here, a lot of it would involve understanding the market environment, competitive environment, and looking at the competitors. Do you think there's a need to do that? Do you think people do that as part of their planning for the next year? Do you think they'll look sideways or wherever the competitors are positioned to sort of go, what have they done this year?
It's
What
always
moves
good
have
to
they
be
made?
self-aware, and that applies to brands as well. And I guess to some extent it'll depend your position in the market, how dominant you are, and how well established your brand and strategy is already.
Yeah.
But I think it's always good to have that awareness, and I'm sure you found this, Matt, is that a lot of companies haven't actually done the thinking they should have done,
Yeah.
or if they have done, it was in the past and it's probably out of date and needs to be rethought about who they are as a company. And it starts sounding wishy-washy, but it's really important. Who they are as a company, what they're trying to achieve, what they're trying to help their customers and their prospects with, and how they talk about themselves, and how that compares to how competitors talk about themselves. Because when people are evaluating a couple of companies that they might potentially work with, that's an essential difference.
I think it's a big point, that, though, in the sense of, I'm not saying you should adjust your mission and vision and values every year, but you should look at them annually to make sure it's still relevant and valuable to the clients that you serve, or the people that you want, the customers you wish to sell to. But then I do think that's actually critical, because a lot of people just don't, they're set in stone, they don't move. But when we talk about customer centricity and understanding your customer and the modern B2B buyer and all these other phrases, I've got a lot of clients and prospects at the minute that would claim they're a really customer centric organisation, and you ask them, what do they know about their customers, what do they know about the buying profiles and behaviours? Quite often it's not a lot. It's a very, very inside out approach to strategy.
And we see that all the time. I think when we engage with take a website development project, for example.
Yeah.
You'll often speak to sales as part of that process, and be like, yeah, we know our customers. This is what they're like. That's what they're like. And when you speak to customers, there's often some of that, but they're only seeing one part of the picture. They're only seeing the part that they've told the salespeople from a small and often anecdotal sample size.
Yeah.
So I think when you start doing that self-reflection, it often helps you understand who you are, and helps, in my opinion, reinforce what you want to be.
Yeah.
Helps to reiterate that, and that can shape your communications going forward.
Nice. Okay. I think we've covered a lot of ground there. So some things hopefully for people to think about when they are thinking about their planning of their communication strategies going into 2021. And I do believe the next edition of our knowledge that we'll produce, the B2B knowledge, is on adopting a strategic mindset as well. So hopefully there'll be some key tips in there, which is in production at the minute, to again have in the back of your mind, in the front of your mind, as you're starting to plan your communications campaigns going into the new year. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks.